Welcome to today's Analyst. This is 8th of August 2023 and we are going to discuss important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now the handout of the session is there in the description box, so you can use it to streamline your current affairs preparation. Now let's go to the table of contents. See, the first topic is your advanced economies and their status since the 2008 global financial crisis. Second topic is your generative artificial intelligence startup bubble. Third topic is in relation to your right to privacy versus right to information, which is in relation to the recent data protection bill which was passed in the Lok Sabha. Also, we'll be discussing about Havana Syndrome. And we'll be taking up Enforcement Directorate and we'll be understanding what is the mandate of Enforcement Directorate plus the criticism of it. So coming to the first topic of today, there is an editorial in the Indian Express which says the great unraveling. That is the experience of the developed economies after the 2008 global financial crisis. Why it is important for our syllabus for GS paper 3, Indian economy and issues relating to it are important. So how this global financial crisis impacted India? For that, you have to understand how this global financial crisis came into being and how it impacted the developed economies. And that is what we'll be focusing in today's lecture. So what is the context? See, we are approaching the 15th anniversary of 2008 global financial crisis. So in this context, we are going to discuss about the advanced economies and how they have basically transformed themselves after this crisis. So first question is, what is this global financial crisis? So in 2018 or the events leading to 2018, there was a very high demand of housing loans in United States, right? And this 2008 financial crisis, you also call it as subprime mortgage loan crisis, right? Where housing loans were readily provided to people without even seeing their financial basics. And would they be able to basically repay the loans or not? So when that was done, basically the money supply in the overall economy shot up. And everything triggered when one of the largest banks of United States got bankrupt. So basically because of this house lending exercise which were done by the banks without seeing the financial metrics of the individuals, that led to the turning of the crisis where the whole financial system got crippled, including your United States and your European countries, right? So we'll be discussing about it in detail in some other lecture, but our focus is that, okay, this global financial crisis happened, but after that, how the advanced economies fared. See, advanced economies after the 2008 financial crisis till now, they have gone with two kind of measures. First measure is your fiscal tightening. Second is loose monetary policy. So fiscal tightening means that the governments are following your contractionary fiscal policy. Now, what do you mean by contractionary fiscal policy? That is the question. See, fiscal policy is the policy of the government in relation to economic matters. And monetary policy is the policy of the central bank in relation to the monetary matters, right? So in fiscal policy, when the government decides that we'll be spending less and we'll be fiscally prudent and we'll not be increasing the government expenditure, right? In that case, you call that policy as contractionary monetary policy. But on the other hand, when the central bank decides that they want to increase the money supply in the economy, which is why they want people to have more and more money, which is why they decrease the interest rates in the economy, that policy is what you call as expansionary monetary policy. The steps undertaken by your central bank. So after this 2008 financial crisis, these two things simultaneously happened. One was that fiscal tightening was done by the government. Second was that loose monetary policy was followed by the central banks in the US economy and in the European economy. Now, what was the effect of this? Certainly, the effect was that the cross purposes of both the policies nullified the effect of each other. On one hand, while the government was having a contractionary fiscal policy, the central bank was having an expansionary monetary policy. So, on one hand, while the expenditure was getting reduced, money supply was getting reduced. On the other hand, central bank was pushing towards increase in money supply. So ultimately, what happened? The effect was that one thing led to the nullification of the other. Eventually, no substantial gain can be achieved, right? So monetary policy, when it was expansionary in those countries, in the developed economies where the global financial crisis happened, it led to distortion and inflation of asset price. Why? Because people were having more and more money. They were borrowing more and more money from the banks because of reduction in interest rates. So because of reduction in interest rates, they were borrowing more and more money from the bank, which is why the asset prices got inflated. Now you all know when money supply is high, inflation also becomes high, because of which the asset price became distorted. And ultimately it led to inequality. And since the central banks or the commercial banks were lending to so many people, it led to the lending of money to the zombie firms as well. That is the parody firms which do not exist in reality, or who basically use a lot of money and do not repay the money, right? And it also led to substitution of labor with the cheap capital. Because people were having a lot of money, the substitution of labor into cheap capital happened, eventually which led to the problem of unemployment. So it led to a staggering unemployment, and it basically made the problem of unemployment even worse, right? So while we are doing all this and while we are analyzing this issue, we must know that having an expansionary monetary policy, reducing the interest rates, it's not the cure for every ailment. It depends on how you use the monetary policy, how you use both expansionary and contractionary trends simultaneously with a certain change in the proportion. On that it depends that is it a cure to our ailment or not, right? So because of this, because of these two opposite things happening in these economies, it became a wrong policy prescription. And while it became a wrong policy prescription, also one thing we witnessed was the advent of the issue called as deglobalization. Now, what happened during deglobalization? During 1991, when our country opened, it got globalized, it got open for the other economies. But after the global financial crisis, when the countries started shutting down their economies, they lessened their interdependence on the other economies. And they decreased the economic relationships with other economies. It led to deglobalization, opposite of globalization. Globalization means integration of the economies. Deglobalization means disintegration of the economies. So that was also one issue which happened. Now, while all these things were happening, right, there was one phenomena which was also seen in India as well, and which is currently seen in India. It was there in the economic survey as well. The advent of your negative IRGT. That is negative interest rate growth differential. Interest rate growth differential. That is the difference between your rate of interest and the growth rate. Now it is said that if rate of interest in your economy is less than the growth rate in the economy, that is growth rate is more, the GDP growth rate, and interest rate is less, then eventually the debt which you are taking, the debt means the loans and the borrowings which you're having, that debt is sustainable. Sustainable means that over a period of time, that debt is having the ability, that country is having the ability to repay that particular debt. So eventually this IRGD ratio tells you what? That the debt which the countries are taking, it is sustainable when the IRGD ratio is negative. When interest rate is less than the growth rate of the economy. So this was the policy response of the advanced economies since 2008 global financial crisis. Also, one thing which happened was that you all know fiscal policy is counter-cyclical, right? But ultimately it turned from counter-cyclical to counterproductive. Now, how it is counter-cyclical? Because if too much money is there in the economy, that is, if inflation is there in the economy, right? Let's say if inflation is there in the economy. So what will the central bank or what will the government do? Government will have a contractionary monetary policy, right? Or let's say whenever there is a deflation in the economy, then the government will have expansionary monetary policy. That is, it will try to increase the money supply. So fiscal policy is always counter-cyclical. That is, the cycle which is going on, fiscal policy counters that. For example, the cycle of deflation is going on, fiscal policy counters it and tries to increase the money supply so that deflation can be cured. And in the same case, like inflation is there, so the economic cycle is under inflation, that is, prices are very high, money supply is very high, fiscal policy will try to reduce the money supply through contractionary monetary policy. That is, it will be counter-cyclical, opposite to the cycle going on in the economy in order to cure that problem, right? But eventually we see that in these developed economies, fiscal policy turned from counter-cyclical to counterproductive, because the fiscal stimulus could not help that much to the economies to increase their growth rate and to sustain their growth rate at higher levels. And also after COVID, deglobalization again happened because of the shock to the supply chains happening because of the COVID and because of multitude other reasons as well, right? What these countries also showed was muscular industrial policy, right? Because after deglobalization, what happened that many of these developed countries, they started reshoring their production. You must have heard America First slogan, right? So these countries, developed countries, US and other Western countries, European countries, they started reshoring their production. Reshoring means that they started telling the firms to come back to their home country and again start production in our country only rather than going to offshore for producing goods. So reshoring production, which will ultimately boost the domestic blue-collar jobs so that the industrial workers, industrial laborers, they get adequate employment, right? But ultimately it also led to beggar thy neighbor policy. Now, beggar thy neighbor policy is a policy under which if a country takes up an industrial policy or economic policy which benefits them but hurts their neighbors economically. For example, let's say if India is having the policy which curbs import of any product from Bangladesh. So we can call that policy as beggar thy neighbor policy. Why? Because our economic policy is hurting the economy of Bangladesh, right? So ultimately because of this counter-cyclical approach and because of this counterproductive approach and muscular industrial policy and deglobalization, ultimately it led to many of the countries embarking upon your beggar thy neighbor policy, right? And China shock, we all know that because of the cheap manufacturing and cheap labor in China, ultimately they took away many of the jobs from United States of America. And also they took away a lot of revenue from US. which is why China shock is also an important phenomena in all this scenario. The same is the impact on the European countries as well. Now coming to the ChatGPT shock. ChatGPT shock, you can call it as artificial intelligence shock as well, where the artificial intelligent tools, again, they are taking up jobs of millions of people who depend and work on the labor part. So it is again hitting on jobs in these developed countries after this global financial crisis, right? So now we need to know what is the way forward. All these are the problems which are there in the developed economies after this 2008 financial crisis, but what is the way forward? See, an intelligent, coordinated, and a global response is required to solve this issue and solve a multitude of issues concerning our global economy. We need to educate, we need to train, and we need to skill our workforce. Upskilling and reskilling is very, very important. So we need to ensure that we work on upskilling of workers and reskilling of those workers. Plus, we need to supplement technology with the labor. We need not substitute labor with technology, right? We need to supplement labor and technology. That is, labor or the workers should supplement technology. They should aid the technology. This should not happen. The technology fully basically substitutes the labor. This should not happen. So this is also one of the way forward. Plus, some people say, or some researchers, prominent researchers across the world say that there is a need of another Bretton Woods conference. Bretton Woods conference, we all know, happened close to 80 years back, which led to formation of your General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, led to formation of your World Bank, led to formation of your IMF and the fixed exchange rate system as well. So the global economists are also saying that a need of another Bretton Woods conference which satisfied the need of the 21st century economies, that should happen. So there is a need of Bretton Woods conference as well. Now these all points, way forward points, you can directly use in your answers as well. And you can mold these points according to the demand of the question, but these can be very, very useful in your answers. Now coming to the second topic, which is related to your generative artificial intelligence startup bubble. Now this is an article in the Hindu, right? And it's linked to our syllabus. If we see our GS paper 3, science and technology, it's related to that and their applications in everyday life. So the context is that there have been concerns about the potential bubble in the generative artificial intelligence space. So we need to understand what this AI startup bubble is, right? Now, in order to understand this, in order to answer this question, what is AI startup bubble? Firstly, we need to understand what is your generative AI. What is generative artificial intelligence? See, whenever artificial intelligence is having the capacity and capability to generate any kind of text or generate any kind of voice or image, that kind of artificial intelligence can be called as a generative artificial intelligence, which is generating or having a particular output, right? Now, what has been happening lately because of the advent of ChatGPT, because of ChatGPT becoming popular, many artificial intelligent tools are coming up. And venture capitalists, that is the people who are having venture funds, who invest in new startups, having a lot of money. Venture capitalists are the people having a lot of money and they invest in various kind of startups, right? So venture capitalists thought of this as a very good opportunity. So since they were having a lot of money, they started investing that billion and billions of dollars into generative artificial intelligence startups. So these startups started raising billions of dollars from these venture capitalists. Now many believe that even though this generative artificial intelligence is becoming popular, and its usage will also increase in future, but still there might be a bubble in the making, which if the bubble get bursts, there will be a loss of billions and billions of dollars to these venture capitalists. And these startups can also shut down. Now, why this is the concern for many? Because if you closely see, when the advent of blockchain technology and Bitcoin happened many years back, the Bitcoin became very popular, right? First cryptocurrency which became very popular was Bitcoin only. And because of Bitcoin, the blockchain technology also became very, very popular. But what happened after that? Many venture capitalists, many seed funders started investing in these cryptocurrency businesses. They started investing in various blockchain technology startups. And ultimately what happened? A bubble got created. Because of the popularity of one cryptocurrency, it led to a bubble creation in the whole economies, mostly in the developed economies. And ultimately what happened? Many of those startups failed. Many of those cryptocurrencies, they didn't get any good response, and ultimately they failed. And thousands of people lost their billions of dollars. And this can be similar, this generative artificial intelligence startup scenario can have a similar outcome like this blockchain and Bitcoin bubble. Many of the experts say that. Because the most important reason is that the investment which these venture capitalists are doing, it is very reckless. That is, they are keeping on pumping more and more money into the startups, rather than looking at the fundamentals of these startups, that what is the aim of these startups, how they will be earning the revenue, how they make sure that their product is viable, their product is sustainable, how their product can be new, without even seeing all those fundamentals. Just when they are seeing that, okay, this venture cap or this startup is related to generative AI, and just seeing some basic overview things, they start investing money into the startup, which you call as reckless investment. Now, this reckless investment can cost the whole economy very dearly. And also there is a lot of froth and there is a lot of misrepresentation in this scenario as well. Misrepresentation and froth done by your AI startups, right? So because of this, there might be a bubble in the making. Now we have to tread cautiously in this scenario. That is, we have to walk very, very cautiously. Because the real value of the startups, these AI startups, will only be known when the novelty, that is the new thing related to artificial intelligence or newness related to this artificial intelligence is gone. When the market gets saturated, then only you would be able to know what is the real value of these startups or what is the real value of the service they are providing. And we have to be more cautious, and we have to have more caution than the usual scenario. Plus, we see that, okay, hardware and foundation models of this generative AI, they are successful. Hardware models includes your robotics. Foundation model includes your language processing models, for example, ChatGPT, right? They are successful, but there are various other models of artificial intelligence as well, which are not too successful, which are not too much in limelight. And many of the venture capitalists, not seeing which hardware or which foundation model the company is making, they are just investing recklessly. Now, what we need to know is that everything is not wrong in this artificial intelligence space. Obviously, it is a growing space. It is a growing industry. This generative AI, it will grow humongously in future, because of the analysis power, because of the interpretation powers it is having. But one thing which this generative AI somewhat lacks, according to many of the theorists, many of the researchers, it is the creative aspect. So sometimes many of these, let's say, researchers say that artificial intelligence tools, they can interpret very well. They can produce results very well. They can do the analysis very well. But when it comes to creativity, there is no competition to human mind. because this chat GPT or this artificial intelligence tools are the culmination of our human creativity only. So our human creativity only got culminated into this creation of these artificial intelligence tools, right? So which is why it is a growing space, but it lacks some creativity, right? Now coming to the different topic, it is related to right to privacy versus right to information. From our GS paper 2 perspective related to the Indian constitution and features of it, this topic, Indian polity, in relation to our Indian polity as well, this topic becomes important. Right? Now, what is the context? Because of the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill passed in Lok Sabha, this right to privacy versus right to information debate has become prominent. Right? Now, in order to understand what is this right to privacy and what is this right to information, we need to understand what is right. Now, rights, as many theorists say, is the obligation of the state or the duty of a state with respect to its citizens. And rights are something which we can demand from our government, right? And there are two kinds of rights which we are talking about here. One is your right to privacy, one is your right to information. Now, right to privacy, it got reaffirmed by a 9-judge constitutional bench in 2017. And Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India case of 2017 reaffirmed this right to privacy. And right to privacy became a part of our Article 21 under our right to life and personal liberty. And coming to your right to information, this act, Right to Information Act, got passed in year 2005, which gave the general public access to government documents, access to government information, ultimately establishing transparency, accountability, and deepening the aspect of democracy in our country. Now, what we need to understand here is that are these rights complementary or are these rights competing with each other? Right? See, first thing what we need to understand is that obviously they are complementary rights, because people are having the right to get information from the government, that how government is performing, where the spending is done, how the government funds are spent, where the positions are vacant. All these things the people are having the right to ask the government, right to know. But people are also having the right to protect their personal information, personal data, right? So both of these rights are for the welfare of the general public, which is why these are complementing each other rather than competing with each other. I hope you get it. Now coming to your DPDP bill, that is your this data protection bill which is passed in the Lok Sabha, it categorically says that a bill to provide for processing of digital personal data in a manner that recognize both the rights of individuals to protect their personal data and the need to process the data for lawful purposes. So this data protection bill also talks about the need to process the data of the individuals for lawful purposes, right? And under section 4, subsection 2, the term lawful purposes is defined as any purpose not expressly forbidden by law. So anything which is not expressly forbidden by law is under the lawful purposes, which according to many will lead to continuing of data mining by big corporates. Because these big corporates using our individual personal data is nowhere not expressly forbidden by law. So it's not expressly forbidden by any law that they can't collect our data, they can't process our data, they can't mine our data. Nowhere it is expressly forbidden by law. So ultimately, according to many researchers, this data protection bill which is there, it is not contributing that much to the right to privacy aspect. and it is not helping the cause of right to privacy according to various voices which are in our country. But in turn, many people say that this data collection by the big corporates is very essential as well. Because if the data is not collected, how will the data be processed? And if data is not processed, how will you be given targeted services? How the companies would be able to create specific services, specific goods targeted for a particular audience, right? So in that case, there are both of the aspects of this debate related to right to privacy, right? Now, coming to this bill only, this data protection bill, some more criticisms which are being done by various lawyers and various thinkers as well. One thing is that this data protection board which is created under this bill, it is under the jurisdiction of your central government, because central government would be appointing the chairman and the members of this data protection board. And according to many, the hegemony of central government would be visible in this digital data protection board, which is according to many of the states as well, which is not right. Now, what we need to understand here is that, okay, this bill talks about data protection. That is the main purpose of the bill also. But according to Edward Snowden as well, who was basically a agent of your American intelligence agency and who compromised various American intelligence files related to the snooping scandal which happened in USA, right? So according to that Edward Snowden as well, what we need to focus on is data collection, not data protection. We always focus on our data needs to be protected from people, our data needs to be we need to be vigilant in order to protect our data. But the main matter of concern is that how that data is collected and where the data is collected. Because collection of data is the main issue by the companies, that how they are able to collect our data. But many of the rules and regulations are not focusing on data collection, rather focusing on data protection. So the bigger picture which we need to see is the picture of your data collection, that how the companies are able to collect the data, and then after collecting data, how they are using it for various purposes, right? Also, there is lack of universal digital and financial literacy in our country. So this is also a problem in relation to safeguarding a right to privacy. And also, our legal system is very overburdened, which makes the chances of protection of our right to privacy very slim. But what we need to do, we need to take remedial measures as well. We need to ensure that this bill, which will be converted into an act in the few days, we need to ensure the implementation of that act becomes very proper. And the implementation of this act is effective and efficient. Only when implementation is good, we will be able to ensure that the right to privacy is upholded and right to privacy of people of our country is upholded, right? Now moving on to Havana Syndrome. The center recently has told Karnataka High Court that it will look into the matter of Havana Syndrome in India. So why it is important for our GS paper 2, social justice, issues related to health, Havana Syndrome is important. Also in relation to your GS paper 3, internal security also, this Havana Syndrome is important. Now the context we already know, that central government has told Karnataka High Court that it will look into the matter of Havana Syndrome in India. Now in that context, we need to understand what is a syndrome. Now, syndrome refers to any symptoms which you are getting because of any illness which our body might be having, right? And Havana Syndrome in particular is basically a syndrome which originated in Havana, Cuba. Country called Cuba. There's a place called Havana in country Cuba. So this Havana Syndrome refers to various medical signs and symptoms which were first reported in 2016 by various American and Canadian embassy staff while they were staying at Havana, Cuba. And subsequently in other countries also, in US, Austria, Germany, and now India, these cases of Havana Syndrome has been reported. So in 2016, it was reported, and various symptoms, for example, concussions, like headache, dizziness, nausea, difficulty in concentrating, these symptoms were reported by several CIA agents as well and several embassy staff as well. So in 2018 also, US diplomats in China reported in Cuba only when they were undercover CIA agents. So in that scenario also, this Havana Syndrome was reported. And the US intelligence services, they are also saying that they have not yet reached a consensus for the formal determination of the Havana Syndrome, but still, many internal sources are saying that sometimes or in some way or the other, it might be related to your Russian military intelligence. So now once we have understood the whole scenario under which this Havana Syndrome got originated, we need to understand what is this all about and what are the symptoms and what are the chronic symptoms of this Havana Syndrome. So first of all, there is no definitive cause which have been found yet, and scientific studies are still ongoing in relation to the Havana Syndrome. But many of these acute symptoms which are there, they are consistent with our exposure to radio frequency energy. So once human is exposed to some radio frequency energy, the symptoms the person will get are somewhat similar to the Havana Syndrome symptoms. So what are the acute symptoms which often occur suddenly? It includes pain in one or both of the ears. It also includes hearing loss, intense pressure or vibration inside the head, difficulty with memory and concentration as well. You are not able to concentrate, feeling of nausea, feeling of dizziness, visual disturbances also, then unsteady gait or loss of balance as well, sometimes vertigo, sometimes dizziness as well. These are the acute symptoms. What can be the chronic symptoms, which can last for weeks, which can last for longer period of time? It includes obviously headache, insomnia, you are not able to sleep, depression, impaired hearing, impaired balance as well, and you're not able to concentrate for a long period of time, or memory loss. So the Havana Syndrome, these all are the acute and chronic symptoms, and we also studied what Havana Syndrome is and how it originated. Right. Now coming to the last topic of today, it is in relation to your Enforcement Directorate. Now why it is important, again your GS paper 2, statutory, regulatory and quasi-judicial bodies. In relation to that, it is important because ED is a statutory body. Now why it is in news? Because recently Enforcement Directorate has taken Tamil Nadu minister into custody. Because of this, ED is in news. Now we need to understand what is this Enforcement Directorate. In order to understand this, let us know, first of all, what areas this ED focuses on. Firstly, ED focuses on the issues relating to your money laundering and foreign exchange laws, right? But what is ED? ED is a premier financial investigation agency of Government of India. So it's a premier agency which relates to your financial related crimes in our country. And primarily two kind of laws it deals with: money laundering laws, money laundering enforcement, and foreign exchange law enforcement in our country. Now it is a statutory organization, as you all know. So it is under your Department of Revenue, DOR, under your Ministry of Finance. So in 1956, Enforcement Unit was made, and in 1957 it was renamed as ED. And in 1960 what happened was that the control of this ED was shifted from Department of Economic Affairs to Department of Revenue. Now first it dealt with the issues concerning your Foreign Exchange Regulation Act of 1947. then the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act of 1973, and ultimately the Foreign Exchange Management Act of 1991, plus your Prevention of Money Laundering Act of your 2002. So right now, Enforcement Directorate is enforcing the laws under your FEMA and PMLA. FEMA means Foreign Exchange Management Act in relation to the management of the foreign exchange of a country, and Prevention of Money Laundering Act also. Right now, what are the various laws enforced? Let's see. FEMA, we all know, 1999. PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2008, it's enforced by your ED. Then Fugitive Economic Offenders Act of 2018, that is FEOA. And also sponsoring organizations under 1974 Foreign Exchange Conservation and Smuggling Activity Preventions Act. So these all are the 4 laws which are enforced by your Enforcement Directorate. Now, what are the various functions of ED? Firstly, it conducts investigations under FEMA. It is also having the power to impose various penalties. It is also executing the provisions of PMLA and Fugitives Economic Offenders Act. It is also having the power of search and seizure of various assets, and it is having a pan-India jurisdiction amongst all the personals, right? But what is the major criticism point of this Enforcement Directorate? See, one criticism point which is done from various quarters is that ED sometimes misuse their powers. Many of the instances have been reported where they have used their power to an exceedingly high limit, and certain times they have misused that power for the wrong purposes. This has been the allegation which has been leveled by various quarters. One more thing is that lack of transparency and clarity. Now, many, let's say, prominent political scientists, they say that ED is lacking somewhat transparency and clarity. So the processes followed by ED, it is not generally known to the general public. And also selective intervention. Now, this allegation also have been leveled from various quarters, various media houses as well, that whenever one political party comes into power, ED selectively intervenes against the other parties. So it goes on, and it has been going on since several decades, right? So this is also one of the criticism point which is obviously reported by various media houses. Then low conviction rates. So low conviction rates of Enforcement Directorate, that is the people whom they are arresting versus the people who are ultimately getting convicted in a court, are very less. Plus lengthy and delayed investigation. It is also one of the criticism points of ED that their investigations are generally lengthy and they are generally delayed. So fast investigations done by ED are not there. Then overlapping jurisdiction. Now, many say that certain agencies like CBI, NIA, and ED, somewhere or the other, their jurisdiction is overlapping. That is, they're not having clear-cut mandates, clear-cut jurisdiction areas, and somewhere or the other, there is some kind of tussle which goes on in some areas of jurisdiction, right? So this is also a criticism point for Enforcement Directorate. Right. Now with this, we end this today's lecture. I hope it was fruitful to you and you learned a lot of new things in today's lecture. I wish you all the very best and good luck, all the best for your preparation.